What happens when a rescue bobcat sees his dad come home after a year? Her reaction melt your heart. The valley had settled into its winter silence, the kind that pressed against eardrums and made breathing feel loud. Snow blanketed the Montana peaks in thick layers, and the last threads of sunlight were draining from the sky like water through cupped hands. Inside the log cabin, the old grandfather clock in the corner ticked toward the moment that mattered most. 18:31. 1 minute remaining. Radar emerged from his corner behind the woodpile where shadows gathered thickest during the day. His spotted coat caught the firelight as he moved, muscles rippling beneath fur that had grown thick for the season. He walked with purpose across the worn wooden floor, each paw placed deliberately, making no sound despite his size. The bobcat was not large by wild standards, but in this domestic space he seemed to fill the room with his presence, with the coiled energy of something that had never fully surrendered its nature. At exactly 18:32, he reached his position. The main door stood before him, solid oak planks held together with iron bands that had rusted at the edges. Radar did not sit. He did not curl up like a house pet waiting for dinner or affection. His four legs locked straight, paws planted firmly on the floorboards. His ears stood at full attention, rotating slightly to catch sounds from beyond the wood. His amber eyes fixed on the door as if he could see through it, as if the thickness of oak and the darkness beyond were transparent to his gaze. This had been his routine for 365 days. Not a single evening missed. Not a single minute's deviation from the schedule carved into his bones. Mr. Sam heard the familiar sound of paws crossing the floor inside. The old man set down the piece of firewood he had been examining and walked to the cabinet where Vance had kept the good whiskey. His joints ached in the cold, and the walk from his own place a few miles down the mountain road seemed to get longer every week. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, then reconsidered and added another finger. The bottle clinked against the glass rim as his hand shook slightly. "There he goes again," Mr. Sam muttered to the empty room. "Forgot the old man ain't coming back through that door. Poor creature." But Radar had not forgotten anything. His memory was not clouded by hope or denial or the soft lies that humans told themselves to ease pain. He knew Vance was gone. He had watched the Jeep disappear down the mountain road, had stood on the porch until the engine sound faded completely, had remained there until the cold bit through his fur and his paws went numb. He knew what gone meant, but he also knew what orders meant. And Vance had given him an order: hold the line. So he held it. This was not the vigil of an abandoned pet. This was a soldier's watch. The biological clock that governed Radar's movements had been set not by instinct, but by training, by the iron discipline of routine that Vance had instilled through their years together. 1832 was not arbitrary. It was the time Vance always returned from his daily patrol of the property, the time when boots hit the porch and the door swung open and the smell of pine and mountain air rushed in with him. The temperature outside had dropped to 10 degrees. Inside, despite the fire crackling and the stone hearth, the cold crept through every crack and gap in the old cabin's walls. Winter in the Bitterroot Valley was not the gentle snow globe picture that holiday cards suggested. It was a living thing with teeth, wind that screamed like wounded animals, snow that piled 6 feet deep against the north wall, ice that turned the dirt road into a treacherous ribbon only the most foolhardy attempted to travel. The gap beneath the door was the worst. Cold air poured through it in a constant stream, spreading across the floor like invisible water. Radar pressed his chest against that freezing current, positioned himself directly in the path of the icy draft. His breath puffed out in small clouds. His muscles trembled minutely, not from fear, but from the body's automatic response to cold. He did not move away. He did not seek the warmth of the fire that glowed orange and inviting just 15 feet behind him. Mr. Sam had tried, early on, to coax him away from the door, had tried to pull him by the scruff toward the hearth where a thick rug waited. The moment Sam's fingers touched the spotted fur, Radar's throat had produced a sound that made the old man jerk his hand back. It was not a full growl, not an attack, it was a warning, low and controlled. The kind of sound that said boundaries existed and would be enforced. Don't touch the sentry, don't interfere with the mission. Mr. Sam understood. He had served too, decades ago in a different war. and he recognized the look in those amber eyes. So he left the bobcat alone and tended the fire and drank his whiskey and tried not to think too much about what it meant when a wild animal showed more loyalty than most humans managed. In the silence of the cabin, Radar could hear everything, his own heartbeat, steady and strong, the pop and hiss of sap in burning logs, the wind outside, howling through the valley like a freight train, the settling creaks of old wood contracting in the cold. But beneath all of it, he listened for one specific sound, a frequency that had been burned into his neural pathways through repetition and association in the wordless bond between two beings who had saved each other's lives. The sound of Vibram boot soles on gravel, the particular rhythm of Vance's gait, favoring the left leg that had never healed quite right. The pause at the bottom porch step where Vance always stopped to scrape mud from his boots, the heavy tread on the wooden planks, the rattle of the door handle. These sounds formed a sequence that Radar's brain recognized as completely as he recognized his own name. People who knew nothing about cats would have said he was living in denial, that animals could not understand time or death or the concept of someone being permanently gone. Those people had never looked into Radar's eyes during those long evening watches. He was not waiting in hopeless confusion. He was counting down with mathematical precision. Every sunset was one day closer to the completion of the mission, one day closer to the order that only Vance had authority to give. Stand down. Radar had not come from a pet store or a breeder. His origin was blood and pain and the brutal randomness of nature colliding with human cruelty. Vance had found him deep in the national forest, 3 miles from the nearest trail, in a place where only someone who knew the mountain intimately would venture. The poacher's trap had been old, rusty, its jaws lined with teeth that had crushed through fur and flesh and scraped bone. Radar's left hind leg was a ruin, blood turning the snow around him into a red circle that grew larger with each struggling breath. Vance had approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in low tones, not baby talk, not the high-pitched cooing that people used with injured animals, just a calm narration of his actions. I'm going to open this trap now. It's going to hurt. You can bite me if you need to. The trap had released with a metallic scream. Radar had not bitten. He had locked eyes with the man and understood somehow that they were the same. Both wounded, both alone, both soldiers who had seen the ugliness of the world and survived it. That had been 3 years ago. Vance himself was newly returned from his last deployment, discharged with honor and a leg full of shrapnel that doctors said would never stop aching. The two of them, one human and one wild, had learned to walk again together in this isolated cabin at the end of a dirt road that disappeared under snow for 4 months every year. Vance had not carried Radar back to the cabin in his arms. He had fashioned a travois from branches in his jacket, dragged the injured bobcat the 3 miles, stopping every 100 yards to check that he was still breathing. At the cabin, he did not set up a comfortable bed or coddle his patient. He sat on the floor, pant leg rolled up, changing the dressing on his own injured leg with practiced efficiency. Then he tossed the remaining roll of gauze toward Radar. A test, an offering, an acknowledgement of equality. The bobcat had understood with the clarity that wild things possess. He licked his own wounds, cleaning away blood and dirt, and held still while Vance splinted the broken leg with pieces of kindling and medical tape. No anesthesia, no comforting words, just 2 damaged soldiers doing the necessary work of survival. The healing took months. Vance did not buy soft beds or toys from the pet aisle of the general store in town. He taught Radar to hunt again. Started with easy prey, pieces of jerky hidden around the cabin, behind furniture and on high shelves and tucked into corners where only keen eyes and a sharp nose could find them. Radar had to work for every meal, had to relearn how to move on 3 working legs and one that would never be quite right again, had to rebuild the muscles that atrophy had weakened. The only concession Vance made to sentiment was the mouse, not a real mouse, but a pathetic lump of fabric roughly sewn into mouse shape, stuffed with dried beans to give it weight. He had cut the fabric from the sleeve of his old military uniform, the one he had worn during his final deployment. The mouse still smelled faintly of gun oil and sweat and the particular dust of distant deserts. It was not a toy for comfort. It was a training tool, something to practice pouncing on, to hone reflexes that meant the difference between eating and starving in the wild. Radar treated the mouse with the same seriousness he treated everything else. He did not cuddle it or so sleep with it. He stalked it, attacked it, carried it in his jaws like a kill. The mouse became his only possession, the single object in the cabin that belonged exclusively to him. The morning of Vance's departure remained sharp in Radar's memory, every detail preserved with the clarity of trauma. 05:45. The sky outside was still black, stars visible through the window. Radar had been dozing by the banked embers of the fire when the first sound registered. Swish, swish. The distinctive noise of bootlaces being pulled tight through eyelets. Vance's boots, the tall ones with the thick soles, the ones he wore when he expected to walk long distances. Radar's eyes opened. His body did not move, but every sense went to full alert. He watched Vance move through the cabin with economical motions, checking items on a list only he could see. The duffel bag came down from its hook on the wall. Clothes went into it, folded with military precision. The movement spoke a language Radar understood. Deployment, mission, movement. Radar did not whine or meow or make any of the sounds that domestic cats use to manipulate their humans. He simply stood, walked across the floor, and placed one front paw directly on the toe of Vance's boot. Not scratching, not clinging, just a firm pressure, a physical statement. I am here. Acknowledge me. Explain this. Vance had looked down at him, the eye contact held for a long moment, communication passing in that wordless way they had developed. Then Vance shouldered his bag and walked to the door. Radar followed, positioned himself in the doorway, blocking the exit. There was no dramatic embrace, no rubbing of cheeks, no human gestures of affection that would have felt false between them. Instead, Vance crouched down to Radar's level. The Bobcat stretched up, and their foreheads met with a solid thud that made both of them blink. It hurt. That was the point. Pain was honest. Pain was real. The headbutt was a traditional greeting among cats, but between Radar and Vance it had become something more, a pact sealed in bone and pressure. Vance's hand came down on Radar's flank, heavy and warm. His voice when he spoke was rough with something that might have been emotion or might have just been early morning. Hold the line. 2 words, but they contained multitudes. They meant stay here, stay safe, stay ready. They meant I trust you with this place. They meant I am coming back. The pre-dawn air bit with cold that stole breath. Vance's Jeep sat in the driveway, old and battered, its paint faded but its engine reliable. Radar watched Vance load his bag into the passenger seat. When Vance turned back toward the driver's door, Radar was already on the hood, all 4 paws gripping the cold metal, claws finding purchase in the worn paint. He knew what this machine meant. This machine took people away. Vance had tried reasoning. Come on, Radar, down. No movement. Tried gentle pushing. Radar's muscles locked. Immovable. Finally, Vance pulled out the emergency reserve, a piece of premium beef jerky from the glove compartment, the expensive kind from the specialty shop in town. He held it out. Radar's nose twitched. The smell was undeniable. After a long moment, he took the offering in his teeth and jumped down. The engine coughed to life. Gears ground. The Jeep rolled forward. Radar stood on the porch, the jerky still clenched in his jaw. He did not chew or swallow. He watched the vehicle navigate the long driveway, watched it reach the bend where the pine trees grew thick. At the last moment before disappearing, Vance's arm emerged from the window. Thumb up, Radar's left ear twitched. Once, acknowledgement received, then the Jeep was gone and the forest swallowed the engine sound, and Radar was alone with a piece of meat he had no intention of eating. He opened his jaws. The jerky fell to the snow-covered boards. It lay there, forgotten, while Radar remained still, eyes fixed on the empty space where the Jeep had been. That night, at 1832, he took his position for the first time. Mr. Sam had stopped by to check on things, found the Bobcat standing at the door like a statue, and shook his head. Give it a week, Sam told himself. Animals got short memories. 1 week passed, 2 weeks, a month. Radar never missed the watch. Sure 32. Every single day, he was there. But the watching was only part of it. When darkness fell completely, and Mr. Sam dozed in the armchair by the fire, Radar began his secondary mission, Operation Retrieval. Conducted with the stealth and precision of a Special Forces raid, the targets were not random. Radar ignored food, ignored comfort, ignored anything that did not carry the specific signature he was searching for, Vance's scent. That unique combination of sweat and wood smoke and gun oil and something underneath that was just human, just him. Impossible to define, but impossible to mistake. The first item was obvious. The workout shirt hung in the bathroom. Forgotten in the rush of departure, Vance had worn it for his last morning run, 3 days before leaving. It was ripe with sweat and dirt and the concentrated smell of exertion. Perfect. Radar waited until when Mr. Sam's snoring indicated deep sleep. He moved through the dark cabin with the silence of a ghost, paused finding the floor in perfect placement, avoiding every creaking board through memory. The bathroom door was ajar. The shirt lay in a corner pile. Radar gripped the collar gently between his teeth, careful not to puncture the fabric, and dragged it back through the hallway. The shirt was larger than him, awkward to move, but he managed. Into the spare closet it went, the one Vance never used much, the one where dust gathered and old boxes sat forgotten. By the 6th month, the shirt's scent had faded to almost nothing. Radar needed reinforcements. He studied the cabin like a battlefield, identifying high-value targets, the tactical glove, leather worn soft from years of use, still carried the ghost of hand sweat. It disappeared from the table where Vance had left it. Mr. Sam noticed things going missing, but blamed mice or his own forgetfulness. He even set a trap, the humane kind with the spring door and cheese bait. The next morning, the trap sat overturned, cheese untouched. But Vance's old wool sock, the one with a hole in the toe, had vanished from the laundry basket. Radar had contempt for such amateur attempts at security. The collection grew. A bandana, a worn paperback book, the belt from Vance's bathrobe. Each item was evaluated for scent strength and portability, then relocated to the closet under cover of darkness. Mr. Sam scratched his head and muttered about the cabin being haunted. In the closet, Radar did not simply pile everything in a heap. He arranged each piece with deliberate care. The shirt formed the foundation, spread flat. The wool blanket that Vance used while watching television went on top, folded to create a nest-like structure. Around the perimeter, he placed the smaller items: glove, sock, bandana, book, everything in its place, everything positioned to maximize scent concentration. By month 9, desperation began to show. The scents were fading despite Radar's best efforts. Natural degradation could not be stopped. The molecular compounds that made up smell were breaking down, dissipating into air. Radar could sense it happening. So he began a new tactic, rubbing his own head and body against every item in the collection, scent marking them with his own oils and pheromones. Perhaps by mixing his smell with Vance's smell, he could preserve something. Perhaps he could lock the memory in place through some alchemical combination of cat and human. But the strangest element of the nest was the gap, right in the center. Next to where Radar curled up during his few hours of sleep, there was an empty space, precisely shaped, roughly the size and shape of a boot print. Radar never lay on top of that space. He never placed any object in it. He kept it clean, kept it ready, kept it waiting. Mr. Sam found the nest by accident in month 11, looking for a misplaced hammer. He pulled open the closet door and froze. The flashlight beam revealed the elaborate construction, and something about it made his throat tight. He closed the door quietly and did not mention it to anyone. Day 365 arrived with no ceremony. The date on the calendar held no special significance to anyone except Radar, whose internal count clicked over to the final number. The sky was overcast, threatening more snow. Temperature hovered at 15 degrees. Mr. Sam arrived at 1500 to tend the fire and refill the water bowl. At 1640, Radar was lying in his nest in the closet. His eyes were half closed, but his ears remained active, constantly scanning for sounds. Then they swiveled hard to the right. From far down the mountain road came a familiar noise. An engine. Not the smooth purr of a new vehicle, but the rough rumble of something old and poorly maintained. Grrr. Clunk. Grrr. The sound of tires on gravel. The whole cabin structure vibrated slightly as the vehicle approached. Radar knew that sound, every cylinder firing in that particular rhythm, every rattle of loose parts. He exploded out of the closet, claws scrabbling for purchase on the wooden floor. For the first time in 365 days, he ran. Not walked, ran. He hit the main door at speed, had to brake hard, left claw marks in the floorboards. His tail went straight up, tip twitching. A sound came from his throat. Purr! The chirp of excitement that bobcats made when greeting friends. Mr. Sam jolted awake in his chair. What the? Heavy footsteps on the porch. The sound of weight on old boards, then knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Radar stepped back one pace from the door. He crouched slightly, muscles coiled. His eyes blazed in the dim light, reflecting fire like two small suns. He was ready, ready for the headbutt, ready for the reunion, ready for the order that would finally release him from his watch. The door swung open. Light from outside flooded in, bright enough to make Radar squint. A tall silhouette stood in the doorway, broad shoulders, heavy coat. Radar rose up on his hind legs, reaching toward the figure, nose extended to confirm what his ears and eyes were telling him. Then he froze. The scent was wrong, completely wrong. Not gunpowder and pine sap and the particular musk of Vance's skin. This was engine oil, cheap cola, laundry detergent with artificial fragrance. The wrongness hit Radar like a physical blow. A young voice boomed out. Hey there, Uncle Sam brought some supplies up. Is that big cat still kicking around? It was Brody, Mr. Sam's nephew from down in the valley. He drove an ancient pickup truck that sounded almost exactly like Vance's Jeep because they had both bought their vehicles from the same dealership in the same year. Radar's tail, which had been standing proud and high, slowly lowered until it touched the floor. His ears rotated backward, flattening against his skull. The light went out of his eyes. Brody reached down, hand extended in friendly greeting. Hey, Radar, you remember me. Buddy. Radar did not growl, did not hiss, did not use his claws. He simply backed away, one step, then another. A rejection delivered through silence and distance. He looked at Brody without really seeing him, looked through him at some point beyond, then turned his back, walked across the living room to the far corner, sat down facing the wall. The disappointment was physical weight on his shoulders. He had allowed himself hope, had felt that surge of absolute certainty, and it had been false. The universe had played a cruel trick. He stared at the rough logs of the wall and did not move even when Brody tried calling to him again. 45 minutes later, 17:25, another vehicle sound. Radar remained facing the wall. He would not be fooled twice. His ears registered the noise, but he refused to react. This would be Mr. Sam's friend, or the postal carrier, or some other human with no significance. He would not turn around, would not hope again. But his nose betrayed him. The wind shifted, blowing in through the gap under the door, and carried with it a complex mixture of scents. Snow, pine, mountain air, and underneath, almost hidden, almost imperceptible, the sharp chemical smell of hospital antiseptic, the smell of prescription painkillers, the smell of medical gauze and antibiotic ointment. Radar's hackles rose. This was wrong. This was danger. Vance did not smell like hospitals. His head turned slightly, just enough to look over his shoulder at the door. The door opened. The wind rushed in, stronger now, and it carried away the top layer of hospital smell, peeled it back like layers of an onion, and underneath, finally, was the scent that Radar's brain had been waiting 365 days to detect. Old sweat, wood smoke, gun oil, the indefinable essence of one specific human. Radar's shoulders dropped. The tension that had been holding him rigid released all at once. He exhaled a long, shaking breath. Vance stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane. His left leg was wrapped in thick bandages visible beneath his pant leg. He had lost weight, his face gaunt, new lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. He looked like he had aged a decade. but his eyes were the same. Radar did not bounce or jump or circle. He walked forward slowly, positioned himself parallel to Vance's injured leg, matched his pace exactly as Vance limped into the cabin. Radar became a living support, ready to brace against that bad leg if it buckled, ready to provide balance, a bodyguard, a partner. Vance looked down at him, looked at the door where Radar's watch position had worn the floor smooth. His jaw tightened. He limped over to where Radar had been standing every evening, placed his calloused, scarred hand on the Bobcat's head. His voice when he spoke was rough and quiet. "Stand down, Radar. Mission complete." At those words, and only at those words, Radar collapsed. His legs gave out, and he hit the floor in a heap of spotted fur and exhausted muscle. The mainspring that had kept him wound tight for 365 days had finally been released. He lay there, sides heaving, and closed his eyes. That evening, after Mr. Sam had left and dinner had been eaten, Vance mentioned wanting his favorite flannel shirt, the red and black plaid one, soft from 100 washings. He thought it was in the spare closet. Mr. Sam shrugged, said he had looked there for something last month and had not seen it. Vance pushed himself up from his chair, using the cane for balance. He took a flashlight from the drawer and limped toward the closet. Radar, who had been dozing by the fire, suddenly lifted his head. His ears went flat. He stood and trotted after Vance, inserting himself between the man and the closet door. A soft growl emerged from his throat. Not aggressive, protective, guarding something. Vance looked at the Bobcat for a long moment. Then he lowered himself carefully to the floor, sitting cross-legged despite the pain it caused his injured leg. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Radar's growl faded. He sat down but remained alert. Vance reached past him and opened the closet door. The flashlight beam swept across the interior. He went still. Everything he owned seemed to be piled on the closet floor, not hung up, not folded neatly on shelves. Everything pulled down and arranged into a nest. The flannel shirt formed part of the structure. His bandana was there, the tactical glove he thought he had misplaced, his wool sock, the robe belt, all of it woven together into an elaborate construction that spoke of desperation and loneliness, an absolute refusal to accept absence. Vance reached in and pulled out the flannel shirt. It was stiff with cold and dirt. He brought it to his nose. The smell hit him, bobcat musk mixed with his own faded scent. Fear and loneliness compressed into fabric. Radar had been sleeping here, trying to recreate something, trying to hold on to something that was slipping away day by day. And there, in the exact center of the nest, was the empty space. Clean floor, carefully maintained. Vance extended his leg, trying to fit his foot into the space. Too big. His foot did not fit. He frowned, then remembered. His boots. The combat boots he had been wearing when he left. The ones he had just removed at the front door. He understood. Radar had not just kept Vance's possessions. He had kept a space for Vance himself. A standing spot, a place in the formation, because Radar had never doubted that the formation would be complete again. Vance, who had not cried when shrapnel tore through his leg, who had not cried when doctors said he would never serve again, who had not cried through a year of surgeries and infections and pain that woke him screaming in the night, suddenly felt his eyes burn. He set the flannel shirt down carefully. His hand found the old leather glove, fingers tracing the worn spots where his own fingers had gripped it 1,000 times. "I thought you would forget me after a month," he said, his voice cracked. "I'm sorry." A tear rolled down his weathered cheek, carved a path through 3 days of stubble. Radar moved forward, his tongue, rough as sandpaper, licked the tear away. The taste was salt and pain in return. Vance did not go to his bed that night. He retrieved his sleeping bag from where it was stored, spread it out on the floor directly beside the nest in the closet. Radar watched these preparations with intense focus. When Vance finally lay down, zipping the sleeping bag up to his chest, Radar stood for a moment as if making a decision. Then he stepped carefully into the sleeping bag's opening. Curled up against Vance's chest, his head came to rest not on the lifeless leather glove, but on Vance's real arm. Warm, alive, present. Radar's purr started immediately. It was not soft or gentle. It was loud, resonant, a diesel truck engine running at idle, vibrating through Vance's ribcage. The sound had healing properties. Scientists had proven that the frequency of a cat's purr promoted bone density and tissue repair. Vance could feel it working on the damaged places inside him that no surgeon could reach. Morning came with pale light through frosted windows. Vance woke to find Radar still pressed against him. He did not get up immediately. Instead, he retrieved his pack, dug through it until he found a packet of military jerky, the kind that lasted forever and tasted like salted cardboard, but provided protein when nothing else was available. He tore the package open, divided the jerky into 2 equal portions. They ate there, on the floor beside the nest, not at the table like civilized beings, on the floor like soldiers in a foxhole, sharing rations, the first meal ritual, reestablishing the bond, erasing the distance of separation through the simple act of sharing food at the same time in the same place. After eating, Vance constructed something. He found boards in the shed, nails in the toolbox. He built a small platform by the window, just large enough for a bobcat to sit comfortably. He positioned his favorite armchair next to it. Then he and Radar took their places, Vance in the chair with his pipe, Radar on the platform, both looking out at the snow-covered forest, neither speaking, just being present together, watching the world exist. 3 days later, Radar carried something out into the backyard, the fabric mouse, his only toy, the object he had kept close for 3 years. It was tattered now, beans leaking from torn seams, the fabric disintegrating. Vance followed, leaning on his cane, breath puffing white in the cold air. Radar dug a hole beneath the oak tree with his front paws, scraping away snow and frozen dirt until he had a depression 6 inches deep. He placed the mouse in the hole gently, covered it with dirt, patted the dirt down. Vance understood. The mouse had been a crutch, a substitute for what was missing. Now it was no longer needed. Radar was bearing his own weakness. Vance stood at attention despite his injured leg, despite the cane he needed for balance, and raised his hand to his forehead in a military salute. Back inside, Vance did not clean out the nest. He left it exactly as it was, a memorial, a testament. He retrieved his combat boots from where he had left them by the door, carried them to the closet, and placed them carefully in the empty space that Radar had maintained for 365 days. The boots fit perfectly. The final puzzle piece clicking into place. Vance made a decision in that moment. Those boots would never be worn again. He and Radar had both finished their war, new footwear for a new mission. The next morning, the clock showed 05:45. Vance woke, sat up in bed. Radar's eyes opened immediately, watched as Vance bent to tie his shoes. The fear was instant and visceral. Not again. Please, not again. Muscles tensed, ready to block the door, ready to jump on the hood of a vehicle, ready to do whatever it took to prevent another departure. But Vance's shoes were different. Canvas sneakers, not boots. And he was not packing a bag. He was reaching into the closet, pulling out 2 fishing rods that had not been touched in years. "Let's go," Vance said. "Today is leave." He opened the door. Early morning sun slanted through the pines. The snow had begun its slow retreat, revealing patches of brown earth and the first brave shoots of spring grass. The Bitterroot Valley was waking up, emerging from winter's grip. Vance pulled his military watch from his wrist, dropped it in his pocket. No more counting hours, no more schedules, no more missions, just time flowing at its own pace. Unhurried, unstructured. Radar jumped up, tail high. They walked together down the path toward the lake, where ice was starting to break apart into floating plates. One shadow was human, moving slowly, leaning on a cane. One shadow was feline, 4-legged, majestic despite its own limp. The shadows stretched long and parallel across the white snow. 2 soldiers walking toward water and springtime and whatever came next. Time seemed to stop flowing, or maybe it flowed so perfectly that movement became stillness, and the moment stretched towards something that might have been eternity. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.